Hey guys, it's time to open up God's Word. If you will, turn to Genesis chapter 31, and we're going to be studying that today. From our previous readings, we learned that Jacob was not only growing his own family, but also his own flocks. He became a very successful herdsman, businessman, for the Lord was with him, and he had given him success in everything they had done for his father-in-law Laban. Laban had earlier begged him to stay, so they made a deal for the imperfect, blemish animals born to Laban's herds. They would belong to Jacob. In this manner, Jacob was able to grow his own personal herds and prosper. But times were changing. Laban had apparently had sons in the meantime, and they were starting to get jealous of their brother-in-law, Jacob. So, let's begin reading Genesis chapter 31, verses 1 and 2. Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, "Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all this wealth from what belonged to our father." And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him was not what it had been. Many scholars believe that Laban had actually adopted Jacob as his son, since we don't really believe that he had sons back when he married Laban's two daughters. If Laban had not had any sons of his own, Jacob would then be his sole heir and would have inherited all that he owned. Now, however, the environment has changed dramatically. Laban did indeed have sons of his own, and they were getting more and more jealous of this adopted son, if you will, their brother-in-law. What's more, his possessions, Jacob's possessions, continued to multiply because of the deal that he had made with Laban. It seems as though they think that he's really stealing their inheritance away right in front of them. This bad attitude towards Jacob isn't limited to these brother-in-laws. Laban's attitude towards Jacob had changed as well. So let's read verses 3 through 13. Then the Lord said to Jacob, "Go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you." So Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out to the fields where his flocks were. He said to them, "I see that your father's attitude toward me is not what it was before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I've worked for your father with all my strength. Yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me. If he said the speckled ones will be your wages, then all the flocks gave birth to speckled young. And if he said the streaked ones will be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked young. So God has taken away your father's livestock and given them to me. In breeding season, I once had a dream in which I looked up and saw that the male goats mating with the flock were streaked, speckled, or spotted. The angel of the Lord said to me in the dream, 'Jacob,' I answered him, 'Here I am.' And he said, 'Look up and see that all the male goats mating with the flock are streaked, speckled, or spotted, for I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land.'" Well, it was time for Jacob to move on. For sure, God appeared to him and expressed his desire for Jacob to go back home to Canaan. So Jacob called out Leah and Rachel to him in the fields to have, a private meeting. He appealed to them in order to get their cooperation in this move. Guys, it's always important to get your wife on board with any major decision such as this. Believe me, it's going to pay off in the end and will make the situation much easier and much better. This situation just goes to prove it. Jacob's wives had witnessed how their father had treated Jacob over the past 2 decades. Laban had deceived his son-in-law on more than one occasion. he kept changing the rules of their agreement. His daughters were witnesses of these atrocities and really victims of it at times. Plus, Jacob informs them that the Lord himself had appeared to him and commanded him to leave and to go back to Canaan. Would they argue? Would they desire to stay home with their father instead? Well, let's read on. Verses 14 through 16 says, Then Rachel and Leah replied, Do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he has used up what was paid for us. Surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children. So do whatever God has told you. It doesn't seem that these two daughters were very happy with their father at all. They wholeheartedly agree with whatever the Lord has commanded Jacob to do. Even though we read about their competition and their jealousy earlier with one another, it seems that they're definitely on the same page here. Not only has Laban's attitude changed towards Jacob, but also towards his own daughters. So it was time for them to leave the nest, to, fly the coop. So let's look at verses 17 and 18. Then Jacob put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove all his livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he had accumulated in Paddan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. So with everybody in agreement here, it was time to act, and act quickly, before anybody changed their mind. He can't wait. Jacob gets the caravan together and heads out towards the land of Canaan. All the while, as we'll see, Laban was away. No doubt he did this to avoid a confrontation. Verses 19 through 21 says, When Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household gods. Moreover, Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him he was running away. So he fled with all he had, and crossing the river, he headed for the hill country of Gilead. I think it's quite ironic here that Jacob's parents desired him to marry someone from his mother's people because the women in Canaan would no doubt deceive him and bring their own false gods and worship them. They would lead their son, probably, more than likely, down that same road. Now Rachel, Jacob's favorite wife, steals her father's household gods. It's clear that Laban wasn't a faithful follower of the one true God, for he had some man-made gods in the house. Rachel goes in and she actually steals her father's gods, and she isn't very faithful to the Lord either, apparently. Most of the archaeological evidence found in this particular area of the world suggests that these household gods were more than likely small, maybe 2-3 inch tall figurines. Most of them found have been female deities, false gods or goddesses. They were believed to be fertility gods. It would make sense considering the trouble Rachel had conceiving up to this point, but there's no excuse for such a thing, let alone stealing gods of all things. Theft, of course, makes Jacob's deception even more hurtful to his father-in-law, Laban. It seems as though their deceptions had worked, though, and they were well on their way back to Jacob's family. But wait, verses 22 through 30 says, On the third day Laban was told that Jacob had fled, taking his relatives with him. He pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. Then God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream at night and said to him, Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead when Laban overtook him, and Laban and his relatives camped there too. Then Laban said to Jacob, What have you done? You've deceived me, and you've carried off my daughters like captives in a war. Why did you run off secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me so I could send you away with joy and singing to the music of tambourines and harps? You didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren, my daughters, goodbye. You have done a foolish thing. I have the power to harm you, but last night the God of your fathers said to me, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. Now you have gone off because you long to return to your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? Jacob had hoped that there would be no confrontation, I'm sure, but here we go, folks. Laban finds out that Jacob, his daughters, everything that they owned had headed out without even saying as much as a goodbye. He didn't even get a chance to kiss his grandchildren or his daughters goodbye. Now, this is probably the farthest thing from what he was thinking. We see from the past his interactions with Jacob as well as his own daughters. This man wasn't that loving of a father-in-law, let alone a father, or at least this is the way I see him or I perceive him. But God came to Laban in a dream to warn him not to do anything or say anything brash. He wants Laban to let Jacob go. He desires for Jacob and his family to move back to Canaan, back to the land where his father and relatives live. But Laban does at least confront them about leaving so abruptly and, of course, the deal with those false gods. They were apparently quite important to him. So verses 33 through 35, Jacob answered Laban, I was afraid because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. But if you find anyone who has your gods, he shall not live. In the presence of our relatives, see for yourself whether there is anything of yours here with me, and if so, take it. Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen the gods. So Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the tent of the two maidservants, but he found nothing. After he came out of Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them inside her camel's saddle, and was sitting on them. Laban searched through everything in the tent, but found nothing. Rachel said to her father, Don't be angry, my lord, that I cannot stand up in your presence. I am having my period. So he searched but could not find the household gods. Jacob meets Laban's accusation with a challenge. If you find anyone here with your possessions, any of your possessions, they shall not live. If he had only known the truth, maybe he would have changed his statement a little bit. His favorite wife was the one that was the guilty party here. She would have been the one who would be put to death if they were found. Well, the search went on, but Laban didn't find any of his gods. They were hidden quite shrewdly by Rachel, his younger daughter. She sat on them upon her camel's saddle, and she used her monthly cycle as a reason not to get up or move. So Laban found nothing because he wasn't allowed to look in the place that they actually were. Jacob was certainly closer than he knew to losing his beloved wife, Rachel. Verses 36 through 42 says, Jacob was angry and took Laban to task. What is my crime? He asked Laban. What sin have I committed that you hunt me down? Now that you have searched through all my goods, what have you found that belongs to your household? Put it here in front of your relatives and mine, and let them judge between the two of us. I have been with you for 20 years now. Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I did not bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself, and you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime, and the cold at night, and sleep fled from my eyes. It was like this for the 20 years I was in your household. I worked for you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you. Now it's time for Jacob to confront his father-in-law for the way that he had been treated for 20 plus years. It's about time. He had worked 6 years in order to marry the younger daughter, but was deceived into marrying the older daughter. Then worked another 6 years for the younger daughter's hand in marriage. Then he worked another 6 years for Laban. But his father-in-law had changed the terms of their agreement some 10 times at least. If there was any loss, Jacob would take it. He was the one who was out tending the flocks, overseeing them, losing sleep over them. What did he receive in turn? Trouble, deception, ever-changing terms in their agreement. At least Jacob gives God the glory for his success here. The Lord's appearance to Laban just makes it clear that this move is certainly God's will. Laban has no right to expect anything more out of Jacob, nor is he to try and persuade him or stop him. If he argued or tried to force Jacob to return, it would be a move against the very one who had made Jacob so successful in the first place. Verses 43 through 55 says, Laban answered Jacob, the women are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine, yet what can I do today about these daughters of mine or about the children they have borne? Come now, let's make a covenant, you and I, and let it serve as a witness between us. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. He said to his relatives, gather some stones. So they took stones and piled them in a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, and Jacob called it Gilead. Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today. That is why it was called Gilead. It was also called Mizpah, because he said, may the Lord keep watch between you and me when we are away from each other. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take any wives besides my daughters, even though no one is with us, remember that that God is a witness between you and me. Laban also said to Jacob, here is this heap, and here is the pillar I have set up between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness, that I will not go past this heap to your side to harm you, and that you will not go past this heap and pillar to my side to harm me. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. So Jacob took an oath in the name of the fear of his father Isaac. He offered a sacrifice there in the hill country and invited his relatives to a meal. After they had eaten, they spent the night there. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then he left and returned home. God's attitude adjustment on Laban had certainly worked, to a certain extent at least. He still claims the herds as his own, apparently, even though they were Jacob's, per their earlier agreement. Laban was now ready to not only allow his daughters and grandchildren to leave with Jacob, but he wanted to make this covenant with him. Neither man would cross over the border set by this pillar and heap of stones in order to harm the other. The pillar and heap would stand as testimonies of this covenant they made that day with one another, along with all the people present that day. Jacob honored the covenant with a sacrifice to the Lord. They all had a meal together, and then the next morning they parted ways. Jacob is finally on his way back to his family in Canaan. He had fled there some 20 years earlier in fear of his brother. He now returns, no doubt wondering what's going to greet him there. Would Esau still be angry? Was his mom and dad still alive? Did they miss him? Had they moved on from there, would he even be able to find them once he got back to Canaan? I'm sure we can all come up with other questions that was no doubt on the mind of Jacob, but he moved on in faith, knowing the Lord was with him and knowing that this move had God's approval. Maybe the Lord has been trying to convince you to make a move. Maybe not literally or physically, but certainly spiritually. Just maybe He's challenging you right now to step out in faith and do something for His glory and His glory alone. Will you listen and heed His call like Jacob did? I praise God that y'all met me here to study God's Word. May God bless you and keep you until we can meet again.